The hammer was about to fall when Garrett Westmore's boots hit the courthouse steps 3 at a time, his heart pounding harder than his stallion's hooves on the dusty trail behind him. Through the open doorway, he could see Ophelia Ravencrest. Standing on the auction block, her chin held high despite the shackles around her delicate wrists. Her emerald eyes blazing with defiance that could set the whole town of Willow Creek ablaze. $500, Sheriff Blackstone called out, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. Going once for 500, 1,000? Garrett's voice boomed across the packed courthouse, silencing every whispered conversation and turning every head toward the tall, weathered rancher who'd just burst through the doors like an avenging angel. Ophelia's eyes found his across the sea of shocked faces, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, the world narrowed to just the two of them. She'd been his father's ward, raised on the neighboring ranch after her parents died in a wagon accident. And Garrett had watched her grow from a spirited girl into the most beautiful woman in 3 counties. But that was before the accusations, before the trial, before everything went to hell. Sold. The sheriff's gavel cracked like a gunshot, sealing their fates together. The crowd erupted in scandalized whispers. Ophelia Ravencrest had been convicted of horse theft, a hanging offense that had been commuted to indentured servitude only because of her gender and the lack of concrete evidence. Every rancher and businessman in the territory had come to bid on 7 years of her labor. But none had expected Garrett Westmore to appear, especially not with such a staggering bid, as the sheriff removed her shackles. Ophelia's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady as steel. "Why?" she whispered when Garrett approached to claim his purchase. "Because I know you didn't steal those horses," he said, his calloused fingers gentle as they steadied her elbow. "And because letting you go to work in Caldwell's mines would be a sin I couldn't live with." The crowd parted as they walked through, some faces showing approval, others twisted with disapproval and envy. Garrett had just spent his entire cattle fortune on a woman convicted of theft, and the whispers would follow them both for years to come. Outside, his horse stamped impatiently beside a wagon loaded with supplies. Garrett helped Ophelia on too. The bench seat then climbed up beside her, taking the reins with hands that had wrestled steers and gentled wild mustangs, but had never trembled like they did now. "Where are we going?" Ophelia asked, as they rolled out of town, past the curious stares and pointing fingers. "Home," Garrett said simply. "To the Double Crown Ranch, your home," she corrected, her voice barely audible over the creaking wheels. "I'm nothing but property now." Garrett pulled the wagon to a halt beside the creek that gave the town its name, water babbling softly over smooth stones. He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious as a promise. "Not to me or not ever." The Double Crown Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom carved from wilderness and dreams. But Ophelia barely noticed its beauty as the wagon rolled up the winding dirt road. Her mind was still reeling from the courthouse. The moment Garrett had appeared like something out of a fever dream, from the way her heart had nearly stopped when his bid rang out across that hostile crowd. 7 years belonged to him. For 7 years, the main house was built from local stone and timber, solid and enduring as the man who'd built it. Garrett's father had started with nothing but a land grant and determination. And now the Double Crown was one of the largest spreads in the territory. Ophelia remembered racing through these fields as a girl, remembered the laughter that used to echo from the bunkhouse, remembered the way Garrett's eyes would follow her when he thought no one was looking. That was before everything changed, before her guardian died and left her alone, before someone planted stolen horses on her property and she found herself standing trial for her life. Ophelia. Garrett's voice brought her back to the present. It stopped in front of the house, and he was studying her with that intense gaze that had always made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "I want you to know something before we go inside." She waited, her hands clenched in her lap. "The papers say you belonged to me for 7 years, but those papers don't mean anything to me. You're free to leave any time you want. I'll give you money, a horse, whatever you need to start fresh somewhere else." The offer hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she dared to cross. "And if I stay, then you work because you choose to, not because you have to. You'll have your own room, your own space, You'll eat at my table, not with the hired hands." His jaw tightened. "And anyone who treats you with anything less than respect will answer to me." Before she could respond, the front door swung open, and a whirlwind of calico and gray hair burst onto the porch. "Garrett Westmore, what in tarnation took you so long?" "I've been pacing holes in my good rugs, waiting for..." The woman stopped mid-sentence when she saw Ophelia. "Oh, honey child." "Ophelia, this is Cordelia Moss. She keeps the house running and keeps me fed." "Cordelia, you remember Ophelia Ravencrest?" Older woman's eyes filled with tears as she hurried down the steps. "Of course, I remember this sweet girl. Lord have mercy, what they put you through." She gathered Ophelia into a fierce hug that smelled of cinnamon and lavender. "Well, you're home now, and that's what matters." Home, the word hit Ophelia like a physical blow. She'd been so long without one that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. "Now, you come inside and let me fix you something to eat, while Garrett gets your things settled," Cordelia continued, bustling them toward the house. "You look like you've lost 10 pounds since the trial, and I won't stand for that. Not in my kitchen." As they climbed the porch steps, Ophelia caught Garrett's arm. "Why are you doing this? Really?" He paused, his hand covering hers where it rested on his sleeve. "Because 8 years ago, when my father was dying, he made me promise to look after you. But more than that, ... He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "'Cause I should have done this a long time ago." 3 weeks into her new life at the Double Crown, Ophelia discovered that freedom was more terrifying than captivity. At least in jail, she'd known what was expected of her. Here, surrounded by Garrett's quiet kindness and Cordelia's motherly fussing, she felt like she was walking on a frozen pond. Never knowing when the ice might crack beneath her feet, she'd thrown herself into work with desperate intensity, rising before dawn to help with breakfast, spending her days mending fences, tending the vegetable garden, and learning the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Physical exhaustion was better than lying awake at night, thinking about the way Garrett's eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, or the electric spark that shot through her whenever their hands accidentally touched. This morning, found her in the horse pasture, working with a young mare that had been spooked by lightning and refused to let anyone near. Garrett's men had given up on the animal, declaring her too wild to be useful. But Ophelia recognized the fear in those rolling eyes. She'd worn that same expression in the courthouse. "Easy, girl," she murmured, approaching slowly with a lead. Rope coiled in her hands. "Nobody's going to hurt you. I know exactly how you feel." The mare snorted and backed away, muscles bunched for flight, but something in Ophelia's voice seemed to calm her. Step by patient step, Ophelia closed the distance, until she was close enough to touch the trembling neck. "That's a miracle if I ever saw one," a voice said behind her. Ophelia spun around to find Garrett leaning against the fence, his hat pushed back and wonder written across his weathered features. "How long have you been watching?" "Long enough to see you work magic." He climbed through the rails and approached slowly, not wanting to spook the mare. "Nobody's been able to get within 20 feet of Tempest since that storm hit. She just needed someone to understand," Ophelia said, running her hand along the mare's neck. The horse trembled, but didn't pull away. "Fear makes us do things that look like defiance, but really, it's just survival." Garrett moved closer, and Ophelia caught the scent of leather and sage that always seemed to cling to him. "Is that what happened to you? The night those horses were found on your land?" The question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ophelia had maintained her innocence throughout the trial, but the evidence had been damning. 3 stolen horses in her barn, fresh brands that could be traced to neighboring ranches, and her own admission that she'd been out riding alone the night they disappeared. "I was trying to save them," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone left them tied up in Devil's Canyon, half dead from thirst and heat. I brought them to my place to nurse them back to health, but before I could return them or find out who they belonged to, the sheriff showed up with a warrant," Garrett finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Someone set you up." Ophelia nodded, tears she'd held back for months finally spilling over. "But who would do such a thing? And why?" Garrett's jaw tightened, and she saw something dangerous flicker in his blue eyes. "I've been thinking about that. You inherited prime land when your guardian died, water rights that half the territory would kill for. If you were convicted, that land would go up for auction." The Meridian Creek property, Ophelia breathed. "But it's already been sold. Randolph Kane bought it for back taxes while I was in jail." "Convenient timing," Garrett said grimly. "Kane's been trying to get his hands on water rights for years. His cattle operation is growing faster than his land can support." The mayor nuzzled Ophelia's shoulder as if sensing her distress. Ophelia stroked the soft nose, her mind racing. If Garrett was right, if Randolph Kane had orchestrated her downfall to steal her land, then she wasn't just a victim of circumstance, she was the target of a carefully planned conspiracy. "What do we do now?" she asked. Garrett reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek, his touch sending warmth spiraling through her entire body. "Now we prove your innocence and get your land back." The Silver Dollar Saloon buzzed with the usual Saturday night crowd when Garrett pushed through the batwing doors, his spurs jangling against the sawdust-covered floor. He'd left Ophelia safely at the ranch with strict instructions to stay close to Cordelia. And now he was hunting for answers in the one place where whiskey-loosened tongues and secrets had a way of spilling out. Randolph Kane held court at his usual corner table, surrounded by his ranch hands and anyone else hoping to curry favor with one of the territory's wealthiest men. He was a big man gone soft around the middle, with pale eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never quite reached them. When he spotted Garrett, that smile widened into something predatory. Well, if it isn't the knight in shining armor himself," Kane called out loud enough for half the saloon to hear. "Come to buy your boys a drink with what's left of your fortune." Garrett ignored the scattered laughter and made his way to the bar. Ordering a whiskey from Mickey O'Brien, the Irish bartender who'd been pouring drinks in Willow Creek since before the town had a name. Mickey had also been a friend of Garrett's father, and the look he gave Kane could have frozen hellfire. "Don't let him get under your skin, lad," Mickey murmured as he slid the glass across the polished wood. "That one's been crowing about your business ever since the auction. Got folks wondering if you've lost your mind, paying good money for a horse thief." "She's not a thief," Garrett said quietly, but his voice carried enough steel to cut glass. "Course she's not," Mickey agreed. "That girl couldn't steal candy from a baby, let alone horses. Not alone horses, but someone wanted folks to think she could." Respond. A commotion erupted from Kane's table. One of his men, a weaselly gunfighter named Viper Donovan, was regaling the crowd with an increasingly embellished tale of the night Ophelia was arrested. "Should have seen her face when the sheriff found them horses," Donovan was saying, gesturing wildly with his drink. White as a sheet, she was stammering about how she was just trying to help the poor animals. "Hell of an actress, I'll give her that." Garrett's hand tightened on his glass. "You were there that night?" Donovan looked up, suddenly realizing he had the room's attention. "Well, yeah. Me and a couple of the boys were helping the sheriff with the search, civic duty and all that." "Funny thing," Garrett said, moving closer. "I heard those horses were found in Ophelia's barn around midnight. What were you doing riding around her property so late at night?" A flush crept up Donovan's neck. "We got word about the missing horses. Had to act fast before what?" Garrett pressed. "Before she could move them? Or before she could return them to their rightful owners?" The saloon had gone quiet, everyone sensing the tension crackling between the two men. Kane's eyes narrowed as he studied Garrett's face, and Ophelia could almost see the calculations running behind those pale orbs. "Now, Garrett," Kane said smoothly, "no need to go stirring up old troubles. The girl was tried and convicted fair and square. You bought her papers legal-like. So what's done is done?" Garrett asked. "Seems to me there's still the matter of who really stole those horses, and who knew exactly where to tell the sheriff to look for them." Donovan's hand dropped to his gun, but Garrett was already moving. His fist caught the smaller man in the jaw, sending him sprawling across the table in a shower of cards and spilled drinks. The saloon erupted in cheers and shouting as Donovan scrambled to his feet, his hand going for his weapon. "I wouldn't," Garrett said quietly, his own gun appearing in his hand with the fluid motion of long practice. "Not unless you're tired of breathing." Donovan froze, his partially drawn pistol trembling in his grip. Around them, the crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see if lead would fly. Enough. Kane's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. Donovan, put that gun away. This is neither the time nor the place for such foolishness. Reluctantly, Donovan holstered his weapon, but his eyes promised retribution. Garrett kept his own gun steady for another heartbeat, then smoothly returned it to its holster. This isn't over, Westmore, Kane said as Garrett headed for the door. You're playing a dangerous game, protecting that woman. Garrett paused at the entrance, looking back over his shoulder. The only dangerous game being played here is the one you started, Kane, but I intend to finish it. The attack came at dawn, just as Ophelia was crossing from the house to the chicken coop with a basket of scraps for the hens.
Oh.
She heard the thunder of approaching hooves a split second before 3 masked riders burst from the tree line, their horses' iron shoes striking sparks from the stone-scattered yard. There she is, one of them shouted, spurring his mount toward her. Ophelia dropped the basket and ran, her heart hammering against her ribs as she raced toward the house. Behind her, she could hear the riders gaining ground, their horses snorting and whinnying as they closed the distance. She'd almost reached the porch steps when a lasso settled around her waist, yanking her backward with bone-jarring force. Got her. The rider hauled on his rope, dragging Ophelia through the dust as she fought to free herself. That's when the front door exploded outward and Garrett appeared with his rifle, Cordelia right behind him, wielding a shotgun like she was born to it. The lead rider was drawing his pistol when Garrett's first shot took his hat clean off his head. Let her go. Garrett's voice carried all the authority of a man who'd been giving life and death. Orders, since he was old enough to hold a gun. Next. Shot won't be a warning. The rider holding Ophelia hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, she managed to slip the rope over her head and roll away from the stamping hooves. Garrett's second shot kicked up dirt inches from the horse's front feet, sending the animal rearing and dancing sideways. Kane sent us. One of the riders shouted as they wheeled their horses around. He says to tell you this is just the beginning. Give up the woman or things get worse. They thundered away in a cloud of dust and flying gravel, leaving Ophelia gasping in the yard, and Garrett standing over her with murder in his eyes. Cordelia rushed down from the porch, fussing and checking for injuries while Garrett scanned the horizon for any sign of returning trouble. I'm all right, Ophelia managed, though her whole body was shaking from the encounter. They didn't hurt me. They came damn close, Garrett said grimly, helping her to her feet. His hands lingered on her arms, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers that betrayed how scared he'd been. This has gone too far. What do you mean? Ophelia asked, though she already knew the answer from the set of his jaw. I mean, it's time to end this once and for all. Garrett looked toward the barn where his best horse was stabled. I'm riding to town to have a conversation with Randolph Kane. No, Ophelia caught his arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle. That's exactly what he wants, to provoke you into doing something rash. If you go after him in anger, you'll be playing right into his hands. Then what do you suggest? Garrett demanded. Let him keep sending men to terrorize you. Wait for them to succeed next time. Ophelia's mind raced, sifting through possibilities and discarding them one by one. Then, like lightning striking twice in the same place, an idea hit her with stunning clarity. The horses, she said suddenly. Garrett, what if we've been thinking about this all wrong? Everyone's been focused on who stole them, but what if the real question is why they were stolen in the first place? Garrett frowned. What do you mean? Think about it, Ophelia said, her excitement building as the pieces fell into place. 3 horses, all from different ranches, all found in my barn. What were the chances that anyone would believe I could steal from 3 separate properties in one night? About the same as the chances of snow in July, Cordelia said from the porch, where she was still holding her shotgun like she meant to use it. Exactly. The whole thing was designed to fail, Ophelia continued. Whoever did this wanted me to get caught. They needed me gone, but they also needed it to look random, like simple horse theft gone wrong. Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes. But if you were the real target, then the horses were never supposed to disappear permanently. They were supposed to be found, which means whoever stole them had to return them afterward, Ophelia said. And if we can prove that those horses made it back to their home ranches after I was arrested, then we can prove this whole thing was a setup, Garrett finished. And we'll have Cain dead to rights. For the first time in months, Ophelia felt hope flickering in her chest like a candle flame in a dark room. They had a plan now, a way to fight back against the forces that had tried to destroy her life. But more than that, she had Garrett beside her, and she was beginning to realize that might be worth more than all the land and water rights in the territory. The ride to the Henderson Ranch took them across some of the most beautiful country in the territory, but Ophelia barely noticed the rolling hills and wildflower meadows. Her thoughts were focused on what they might discover when they reached their destination, and on the man riding beside her whose presence had become as necessary to her as breathing. Garrett had insisted on coming with her despite her protests that it would be safer if she went alone. I go, he'd said, with that stubborn set to his jaw that she was learning to recognize. We're in this together now. Together. The words sent warmth spiraling through her chest, followed immediately by a pang of fear. What would happen when this was over, when her name was cleared and she was free to reclaim her land and her life? Would Garrett still want her then, or was his protection born purely from a sense of duty to his father's memory? The Henderson place was smaller than the Double Crown, but well maintained. With neat fences and healthy-looking cattle grazing in the near pasture, Jonas Henderson came out to greet them, a weathered man in his 60s who'd known both their fathers back in the early days of settlement. Ophelia Ravencrest, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Didn't expect to see you riding free. Henderson, Ophelia said, dismounting and offering her hand. I was hoping you might answer a few questions about the horse that was stolen from you last spring. Henderson's eyes flicked to Garrett, who'd remained mounted and silent, his hand resting casually on his gun. Don't know what there is to say. Horse was stolen. Found in your barn? You went to trial for it? Case closed. What about after the trial? Ophelia pressed. Did you ever see that horse again? Something flickered in Henderson's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or guilt. What kind of question is that? It's a kind that might prove my innocence, Ophelia said quietly. Mr. Henderson, I know you're an honest man. If someone returned your horse after I was convicted, wouldn't you remember that? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Henderson sighed and removed his hat, running his fingers through graying hair. Hell, I never did believe you stole thunder anyway. No, you always had a way with horses, but you were never one to take what wasn't yours. So the horse did come back? Henderson nodded reluctantly. About a week after the trial ended, found him in my back pasture one morning, healthy as could be. Figured whoever had him felt guilty and decided to make things right. Did you report it to the sheriff? Garrett asked. What was the point? You'd already been convicted, and Thunder was home safe. Didn't see how stirring up more trouble would help anybody. Ophelia felt her heart sink. One horse returned meant nothing by itself. Henderson could have simply found a stray animal and assumed it was his stolen property. They needed more evidence, solid proof that all 3 horses had made their way back to their original owners. Mr. Henderson, she said carefully, do you happen to know if the Crawfords or the Millers had similar experiences with their missing horses? The older man's face went carefully blank. What? Wouldn't know anything about that. But his eyes told a different story. Both Ophelia and Garrett caught the telltale signs of a man trying to hide something. They spent another 20 minutes pressing him for details. But Henderson had said all he was going to say. As they rode away from the ranch, Garrett shook his head in frustration. He knows more than he's telling, but he's scared. The Cain's got this whole territory walking on eggshells. The Crawfords are next, Ophelia said. If we can get confirmation from them, ... We'll have enough to take to Judge Morrison, Garrett agreed. 3 horses returned after your conviction would be pretty hard to explain away as coincidence. They pushed their horses hard, racing the setting sun toward the Crawford spread. But as they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, both riders pulled up short. Smoke was rising from the direction of the main house, and even at a distance, they could see the orange glow of flames against the darkening sky. Jesus, Garrett breathed, spurring his horse toward the disaster. They arrived to find the Crawford family standing in their yard, watching helplessly as their barn burned to the ground. Tom Crawford looked up as they approached, his face streaked with soot and tears. "Started about an hour ago," he said without preamble. "Whole thing went up like it was soaked in coal oil. Lost 12 horses, including the mare that was stolen, and returned last spring." Ophelia felt ice forming in her veins. "Returned." Crawford nodded grimly. "Found Rosebud in the south pasture the week after your trial, just like she'd never been gone. Was going to tell the sheriff, but..." He gestured helplessly at the burning ruins. "Guess it doesn't matter now." In the distance, thunder rumbled across the valley, promising rain that would come too late to save the Crawford barn. But it might not be too late to save the evidence they desperately needed. They could reach the Miller Ranch before Kane's men got there first. The Miller Ranch sat in darkness when Garrett and Ophelia arrived, their horses lathered with sweat. From the hard ride across the valley, no smoke rose from the buildings. No orange glow painted the sky. But somehow the silence felt more ominous than the crackling flames they'd left behind at the Crawfords. "Too quiet," Garrett murmured, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Frank Miller's got 6 kids and twice as many dogs. This place should be buzzing with noise." They dismounted and approached the house on foot, every shadow a potential threat. The front door stood open, creaking softly in the night breeze. Inside, overturned furniture and scattered belongings told a story of hasty departure. "Frank," Ophelia called out. "Mrs. Miller, are you here?" "They're gone." The voice came from behind them, and both spun around to find Viper Donovan emerging. From the barn, his gun drawn and pointed directly at Ophelia's heart. "Packed up and lit out for California this afternoon. Funny thing about fires, they make people nervous about staying in one place too long." "You son of a bitch," Garrett snarled, raising his rifle. Ah, Donovan said, wagging his finger. "I've got 5 men positioned around this place, all with orders to shoot the lady if anything happens to me. So let's all stay nice and calm. While we have ourselves a little chat," as if summoned by his words, armed figures stepped out of the shadows around the ranch yard. Garrett recognized 2 of them as Kane's regular hands. The others were hired guns brought in from outside the territory. "What do you want, Donovan?" Garrett asked. "What I want is for you and your lady friend here to stop poking your noses where they don't belong," Donovan replied. "Mr. Kane's been more than patient, but his patience is running out.
Oh.
So here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back to your ranch, pack up the girl's things, and send her on the next stage out of the territory. Permanently. And if we don't?" Ophelia asked. Donovan's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Well, let's just say accidents happen to folks who don't listen to good advice. Could be a fire, could be a fall from a horse, could be bandits on the trail. This is a dangerous country, after all." "You're talking about murder," Garrett said. "Talking about natural consequences," Donovan corrected. "Now, what's it going to be?" The standoff stretched like a taut wire. 6 guns against 2. The odds hopeless, and everyone knowing it. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the barn, came the sound of approaching horses. Lots of them. Donovan frowned, glancing toward the sound. That's not his words were cut off by the sharp crack of a rifle shot, and one of his men pitched forward into the dust. Suddenly the night erupted in gunfire and shouting as a dozen riders thundered into the ranch yard, their weapons blazing. "Sheriff's Department," a familiar voice bellowed. "Drop your weapons." It was Sheriff Blackstone himself, leading a posse of deputized citizens that included Jonas Henderson, Tom Crawford, and half the ranchers in the county. The tide had turned in an instant, and Donovan's hired guns found themselves outnumbered. "And outgunned? Don't shoot," Donovan cried, throwing down his pistol. "We surrender." The gunfight was over almost before it began. Kane's men either dead, wounded, or captured without a single casualty among the sheriff's posse. As the dust settled, Henderson approached Garrett and Ophelia, his weathered face grim with purpose. "Reckon we owe you an apology, Miss Ravencrest," he said. "All of us. We knew something wasn't right about your conviction, but we were too scared of Kane to speak up." "What changed your mind?" Ophelia asked. "Crawford's barn burning down, for one thing." Henderson replied, "That was a message to all of us about what happens to folks who talk too much. but mainly it was Frank Miller. The Millers, Garrett asked. Donovan said they left for California. They did, Sheriff Blackstone said, joining the conversation. With a satisfied smile. But not before Frank came to see me with a very interesting story. Seems his stolen horse found its way home the same week yours did, Mr. Henderson. And he's got written testimony from all three families about their returned animals, along with a signed statement identifying Viper Donovan as the man who brought them back. Ophelia felt her knees go weak with relief. It's over. Not quite, the sheriff said. Still need to arrest the man who is paying Donovan's wages. But I expect we'll find him at his ranch, probably wondering why his hired guns haven't reported back yet. The ride to Kane's spread was more like a parade than a pursuit. The enlarged posse thundering across the valley in the pre-dawn darkness. They found their quarry exactly where the sheriff had predicted, standing on his porch in his nightclothes, his face pale in the lamplight. Randolph Kane, Sheriff Blackstone, called out, "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, arson, and attempted murder. You have the right to. This is preposterous," Kane sputtered. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing on my part." "We have Donovan's confession," the sheriff replied calmly. Seems he had a sudden attack of conscience when he realized he was looking at a hanging. "He's told us all about your little scheme to frame Miss Ravencrest and steal her land." As the handcuffs clicked around Kane's wrists, Ophelia felt a weight she'd been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. Justice would be done, her name would be cleared, and her land would be returned. But more than that, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. She looked over at Garrett, was watching the proceedings with grim satisfaction. As if sensing her gaze, he turned toward her, and the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night of her life. "Ready to go home?" he asked, offering her his hand. "Yes," she said, taking it without hesitation. "I'm ready." But as they rode away from Kane's ranch with the first light of dawn painting the sky golden rose, Ophelia realized that home wasn't a place anymore. Home was the man riding beside her, the one who'd risked everything to save her, the one who'd seen her worth when the rest of the world saw only a convicted criminal. 3 months later, when Judge Morrison officially cleared her name and returned her property, Ophelia signed the deed over to Garrett as a wedding gift. They were married that same afternoon in the little church in Willow Creek. With half the territory in attendance, and Cordelia crying happy tears into her best lace handkerchief as they danced under the stars at the reception, Garrett pulled his new wife close and whispered in her ear, "I love you, Mrs. Westmore." "I love you too," she whispered back. "But I have to ask, did you really come to that auction just to save me?" Garrett's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Well, I did hold that auction ticket, didn't I? Bet the moment I saw you standing there. So brave and beautiful and defiant, I knew I wasn't bidding on 7 years of labor. I was bidding on the rest of my life." Ophelia laughed, the sound floating across the ranch yard like music. "Best investment you ever made?" "The very best," Garrett confirmed, spinning her around under the starlight. "The very best indeed." And in the years that followed, as the Double Crown Ranch prospered and their children filled the house with laughter neither of them ever had. Cause to regret the day a rancher held an auction ticket but rode away with love instead.